We are excited you are all here. We are very excited to have Raven Hollins with us. Raven is the co-founder of TripTych Strategies, which is I think, founded within sometime during this pandemic. I can't remember quite when. And Raven also served as the national engagement coordinator for the Pete for America campaign. And so many of you, if you are a supporter of Pete, you may have gotten an email from her or seen her work throughout the campaign and on Twitter. And we're just excited to have Raven here because Raven, I think, has a unique perspective, just not only working with Pete, but also just from her individual story and everything that she has done prior to, this last primary, and ensuring that we have a trustworthy democracy that works not only for you and I, but for everyone. And so thank you, Raven, for choosing to join us and introduce yourself.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. It's truly a pleasure. I will say I'll give a bit of background about TripTych in a little bit, but one of my co-founders is Samantha Steelman, who I'm sure a lot of you know as well. And she says hello, first of all. But we were both very excited. Number one, because you guys invited me to be on today was totally unrelated to Sam, and we just think it's so cool and how things have kind of circled or come back around, and how the Pete family just stays connected one way or the other, no matter like how it happens. We just all seem to come back together, and that's been really exciting to see. But a little bit more about me. I grew up in a military family, so I was born in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and my dad served 20 years in the Air Force, but deep down, I'm a Texan. And once he retired, we moved back to Texas, which is where I grew up for the most part. My career started in finance, actually, but I realized pretty quickly, I kind of thought I would go in, change things from the inside, work my way up, and then you realize very quickly that's not quite how the world works. And I'm sure we'll kind of talk about, trust in those types of spaces. And I got really interested in the lack of trust in that type of space, but also realized there were more kind of substantive and fulfilling ways for me to do that work. And so I found my way to organizing and started organizing first for the Beto Senate campaign in 2018, and then also did some work in the criminal justice reform space before I found Pete Buttigieg. And I kind of was introduced to him just from a random kind of YouTube video from him speaking at South by Southwest, actually. And I found his words engaged me, not just because of what he was saying, but also how he was saying them. And I could tell immediately, as I'm sure all of he speaks in a way that is so eloquent, but also very honest in a way that we haven't experienced in a very long time. And throughout the process of working on that campaign, but also a lot of the reasons that got me up. I was living in Austin, Texas at the time. And what got me up from driving from Austin to South Bend, Indiana to go work for him in the first place was because I could tell that what he was representing was so much beyond even who he was. He saw a vision for the country that was very much about community and belonging and inclusivity and rebuilding the infrastructure, not just physically, but also tangibly and values based, that is missing from a lot of our society. So I'm obviously very excited to talk to you all about that. Can give a bit more background about what I did for Pete and then what I'm doing now. So I did served a couple of different roles for him. I think the one that I'm best known for is grassroots investment director, which was building out all of our events across the country that would typically be at least 1,000 strong, which was insane for a fundraiser, and also insane in our COVID world of thinking about that many people being in one place. But really got my feet wet and realized pretty quickly, oh, this guy is going to be something special beyond what I even thought he could be, and how many people were showing up. But we really built a organization or a department and a grassroots fundraising base that was very much based on that as well. Wanting to bring people in and be a part of the conversation and highlight what was special about their communities and special about them, and not just focus on the candidate. And I think the fact that I had the leeway to do that on his campaign is also so indicative of who he is as well. And then, yeah, I also served as the national engagement coordinator, and then also the Texas State Deputy Director, and similar thing, just building out, those spaces in a new way. And then post that campaign, I took some time to myself to just kind of rest, re-engage my family, see my family again for the first time in like a year, and just kind of, breathe, meditate, figure out what I wanted to do next. And I realized pretty quickly I wanted to carry on the work that I had done on Pete's campaign, and realized that we had built something really special. And so wanted to figure out how to put that out into the world in new ways. And what that ended up being was forming a company with Sam, as well as Carrie Gooch, who was our video director. And our, whole thing is reimagining political culture. And so it's literally taking what we did with Pete, and trying to expand it out in the world, as you guys are doing here, in new ways, and on the campaigns and the nonprofits we work with, and creating new conversations, new ways of connecting to people and building community. And I think that all of that is really at the foundation of what trust is about. So again, really excited to be here, and thank you guys for letting me talk about myself for a little while, because that's always weird and awkward.
Well, thank you so much, Raven. And the first question is, when you heard that Pete's new book was Trust, and just thinking of working on that campaign, and then ending, and then as things just kind of continued in our nation for the months to come, when you heard that title, what was your first reaction?
I was like, makes sense for Pete. um, and what I mean by that is, and it's funny because it was something that I've been thinking a lot about too. And I know something that I talked about during the campaign that I thought was so important to learn from the 2016 election was, there's this article, I think, in Politico, that this reporter basically went out to two different communities and kind of studied them for a period of time. So they were the same, like population wise, they were the same demographically, like very similar communities in every way, except one. And what that one thing was one town had a very strong sense of community. So like the basketball games on Fridays, right? Everyone was kind of going and showing up together. Like there was a very clear support system. People were more likely to interact with their neighbors, things like that. And in the other town, that wasn't the case. People were just kind of on their own, and they were doing their own thing. And what he found was, in 2016, the town that didn't have a sense of community voted for Trump. And the town that did have that sense of community voted for Hillary Clinton. And so the whole thing was kind of about this lack of community and lack of trust that is starting to pervade across our communities across the country, is really starting to affect people's ability to be taken in by, like all the things that we're seeing on social media and like fake news and all that type of stuff. And so I was thinking about that going into Pete's campaign, because it was very clear to me, like he was the guy to cut through that. And we've seen him do that on Fox News, obviously. And so when it came out, that's what his book was about, and that's what it was titled, I was, number one, very excited, because I was like, I want to dive into his brain on this topic specifically. So that's awesome. But it's also so true to, I think, who he is and who he represents as a new generation of leader, and forming that conversation and being willing to talk about that when no one else really is. I think a lot of people are talking about the surface level, like things of, like fake news is infiltrating, like, the conversation, and things like that. But people aren't really willing to drill down into what's actually wrong and what do we need to fix to get beyond. So it's really exciting to see him want to talk about that.
Have you had a chance to read the whole book, part of it?
Part of it, yes. I started diving in a little bit yesterday and a little bit today when I could. But I actually was helping my plan was to read through it this weekend, and then my grandmother had some tasks for me yesterday, which is like very wholesome, but and hilarious, and part of the fun part of being home right now. But she totally messed up my Sunday, so blame it on grandma.
Well, I think just one quick follow up. You talked about how you wanted to get inside the mind of Pete with this topic. But could you just briefly share for you with trust and with our the way our country has been doing politics, is doing politics, and how our democracy is working or is not working. Um, what does trust look like for you as an individual, not as a campaign staffer or anyone who worked for Pete Buttigieg or anything else, but just for you individually?
Yeah. That's a great question. And, something I've been talking a lot about in relation to trust is accountability. And I think that's something that we kind of think about, what does it look like to feel that sense of trust, but we don't talk a lot about how do we back that up. And I think that we found that to be a really big issue right now in particular, right? Is that so much trust has been broken that there's not even a clear way to like hold people accountable to their actions and to their words. I think someone that comes to mind with that is Lindsey Graham. He was able to kind of say, back in 2016, that in the exact same scenario, you could hold him to his words and like be held accountable. And now he's literally, turning around on the other end and saying, actually, believe what I'm saying now. Don't believe what I said 4 years ago. And it's like that can't be how we define trust. It can't be a day to day, this is how I'm feeling today. This is how the wind's blowing today. So like go with me and the wind today. It very much has to be a much more structured, like we're all going to be on the same page. We're all going to say that the sky is blue and move in that direction. So I think accountability is a huge part of that. I also think listening is so important. And I think that's something that we really don't have in our culture all the time. Is everyone's thinking about talking and what they're going to say next, and we listen to respond, but really taking the time to hear about other people's perspectives and understanding that like everyone's truth may look a little bit different, but it's all grounded or should be grounded in the same values and grounded in the same direction that we want to move as a country, I think is also really important. So I think those are my two big things, are trust and listening, or accountability and listening, are what come to mind for me.
Thank you so much. And one of our questions that was submitted tonight comes from Pristine. And Pristine, I privately DM'd you your question in case you had forgotten. But Jana will get you unmuted and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hey, yes.
Hi, Raven. It's so nice to see you. My question was, how can we use content in digital engagement to create trust in the communities that we seek to connect with?
Yeah. That's a great question. And that's definitely a plug for relational organizing, I'll say. And I think it is really a new and important way for us to think about how we're using our networks and also connecting to the people that we know best when having these conversations. And the reality is the people in our lives, right? I think the digital space can get so confusing because a lot of times people can respond to you or say like really messed up things without having to put a face or a name to themselves. They can use a fake name, they can use a picture that doesn't actually represent them and say whatever they want to. Whereas in our day-to-day lives, whether it's your actual family or friends, your kids soccer coach, whatever the case may be, like those people we have to interact with in a much realer world. And therefore, right, the accountability, the trust looks very different there. And I think when it comes to how we utilize our digital tools and our digital spaces to build up this trust. I think connecting to the people that we are connected to in our day-to-day lives and telling and showing the things that we care about and having those conversations in those digital spaces and standing up for what we believe in allows the conversation and also what like the world of what our digital world looks like. I think a lot of times the loudest voice and the most, controversial voice is the voice that we give like to in the digital space, when it's like we could be liking, the person that's talking about kindness and compassion and all those things, but we also have to be talking about them ourselves. So I think building strong networks within each other and things like this group building bridges, continue to build this out and support each other, I think is so important. So I hope that answered your question.
And definitely a question that, with a pandemic and we're all, kind of stuck at home and don't get to see each other, that digital organization is key. And you brought up relational organizing, and that we really believe in the power of relational organizing because Building Bridges was founded by Pete's supporters. And so they were able to witness the strength of it. And so I'm just going to pop into the chat real quick. It's a link. We actually do relational organizing training every week, and that's ran by Kaz, which I believe Kaz is on our call tonight. And so, and then also just a plug, the Joe Biden campaign is doing relational organizing. Rui from Peep for America, she is leading that in non-battleground states, I believe. So yeah, definitely check it out. And I know Vanessa put a few other things in there. As you talked about, this book club, it's about building community and dialoguing and listening to each other. So yeah, so definitely a few events to check out in that regards. Our next question is going to be, and thank you, Christine, for your question and submitting that, comes from Eric in Virginia. And so Eric, we'll get you unmuted and I will DM your question in case you forgot.
Hi, Eric.
Hey, good evening. You hear me? All good?
Yeah, you're good.
I was trying to find it here. I think I kind of remember it. What is your favorite story from the primary of being on the ground with Pete and seeing Pete win the trust of either a person or a group who was in opposition to him at the beginning of that dialogue?
For sure. It's so the one that comes to mind, I actually wasn't there in person for, but I remember it was one that really kind of took us all back. He was at an event in Iowa, actually, and someone was kind of, trying to heckle him and kind of get under his skin, and was specifically kind of making some frankly racist remarks. And the expectation, and I don't think Pete knew, it was a smaller group, so I don't think he knew that anyone had him on video. Like obviously our videographer was there, but like everyone knows that everyone's has a video phone on you at all times, but he wasn't necessarily thinking in that context. And so the person kind of starts heckling him in a way of like trying to bait him to give a certain answer. But he responded like immediately and very strongly. And number one, like I think initially Advance was kind of trying to quiet him down and see if they could get the guy to leave or just kind of calm down and so that Pete can move on to another question. And Pete was like, no, like let's hear what he has to say. And, was very willing to take on the conversation. And so he listens to what the guy has to say. I don't remember specifically what was said, but Pete's response was very strongly, that it was basically about creating a sense of belonging and that everyone has a right to speak up and to be heard in a way that they feel valued, and that we shouldn't shut people down just because of where they come from or what they're representing, that they deserve to be heard and listened to. And my understanding is that like him and that guy ended up kind of having an off, like what we would call an off-chain conversation, but basically after the event, like they had a kind of a one-on-one, and the guy ended up being like, very appreciative. I don't know that he turned him like directly in that moment, but was definitely not expecting to have the conversation with Pete, and Pete was very much willing to have the conversation. So that was really cool.
Very good. And Raven, shared earlier before we let you all into that working with Qasim Rashid's campaign in Virginia, running for Congress. And Qasim has several stories. One that actually just happened this weekend, where had some hecklers of 45 supporters, and did the same thing of bringing the folks in, allowing that, rather than them, chanting and kind of distracting from the event, brought them into the conversation, and similar results. And I think, as Raven, you mentioned earlier, is listening, and that's a huge part of building that trust. And in the digital world, we don't really have to listen if we don't want to, because we can hit unfollow or hide or whatever, or block or unfriend.
And I'll say this too. I think another moment that actually came to mind that I was at, and it's one of the things I appreciated most about Pete was, a lot of my job was getting him in front of the most people at one time. But one of my most memorable events that I put together with him was actually a roundtable with a number of women, and I think a majority of women of color, who all worked within the repro justice space and women's rights space. And they were not like people. Like they were very much like, like he's a presidential candidate and he's willing to listen. So I'm very much willing to show up and talk about my work and where I'm coming from. But they were not, like Pete stands and wanting to take pictures or any of that. And so he comes in, and I think there are probably like 12 of us in the room. And the majority of that, and one of the hard things about thinking about like cool Pete responses in those moments is because he spent the majority of that event listening, and he had a notebook next to him, and he was like writing down notes and like taking it all in, and very much like, I want to hear from you guys to make sure like all the policies that we're building out, all of the things that I would want to build out in an administration are reflective of you and the work that you're doing on the ground. And he talks so much about that, of us needing to use the federal government to amplify like local organizations and local work that are so much more in touch and aware of what their communities need than a federal government in DC can be. And so I thought that was such a cool moment. And of course, because Pete does in every space, he definitely turned some people around in that event. And he got a lot of head nods and like, okay, like I'm gonna have to pay attention. And I had like one woman come up to me afterwards, and she was a doctor. And from what I understood afterwards, I didn't know this until afterwards, but she is apparently a very, excuse my language, but a very hard ass. And she's like, she's not the type, she's gonna come in and she's like, no, you have to convince me. And she came up to me after the event and was like, thank you so much for putting this together. And, I had heard some things and I wasn't so sure about where I stood on him. And after this, like, I can tell like, he deserves and should be in this race. So thank you so much for putting this together. So that was another really cool one that just came to mind. So thank you.
Very cool. We had a question submitted, and Tracy submitted this question and was wondering, throughout the campaign, obviously building trust with voters is key for any political candidate. But how do you build trust with a campaign staff?
Yeah. So I'll kind of give two moments on this one. One's fun and then one's a little more difficult. But I think, let's see, how do we want to start? We'll start with the difficult one and then we'll end with the fun one. And so obviously, one of the hardest things, and I think it's important to acknowledge, right? One of the hardest things that we experienced on the primary was this idea that Pete couldn't get Black voters and voters of color, which, you know, was really tough for us because I'm like, I drove 13 hours to come work for this guy. I can promise you he can get voters of color. So I don't get why we keep having to, you know, kind of respond to this. But it was obviously something that was difficult, that he got hit on, what I would say unfairly throughout the campaign. But you know, it affected staff of color in particular pretty hard throughout the campaign because, you know, again, we are here doing this work for him every day and absolutely believe in his entire vision for America. And I would say all the time, the reason why I went to work for Pete was because when he spoke about his vision of America, I saw myself in that as, you know, a woman, as a woman of color, as a Texan. Like, you go down the line, like, I see myself in this man's vision for what he wants the country to be, and I want to be a part of bringing that into the White House. And so, but it did affect us, and it's hard to have to answer those questions, particularly when you're in, you know, outward and external facing roles. So there came a point where we were getting close to the Iowa caucus, and we had a team retreat. So we all came together, and we were kind of like, let's all come together because we've been working really hard and we're about to have to work even harder. So like, let's come together as a team and kind of connect and like get all on the same page as we move forward into the next phase of the campaign. And what we did with that retreat, and we actually had some moments after the retreat as well, is we had those really tough conversations of like, where do we stand on this issue as a country, and how can we as a campaign do better internally, so that we are doing better externally to not just respond to these, but also ensure that we're making sure everyone, no matter what community they come from, in the country, are feeling like they're heard and they're a part of this campaign. And I can say that that is very rare in campaign world, to be willing to have those tough conversations and hear your staff and hear their frustrations and being willing to answer for them. And I think it's so reflective of who Pete is as a leader, that they were willing to put up with us basically wanting to have those really tough conversations. But I think the fact that our campaign did that at all was obviously a trust builder and something that is really rare. So I will say that, number one, and I think it's so important for us to, particularly as staff, to continue to speak about that fact, because I think it is a really rare one for campaign staff to go through that the way that we did, but also the way that the campaign responded. The fun one is, so we had a event in Austin, Texas, and I was trying to convince my parents to come out for it. It's like a 5-hour drive from where they live. And so we were kind of going back and forth, and they were like, I don't know, it's a long drive and blah, blah, blah. So they finally decide they're going to come down for it. And so, you know, give them the 5-star treatment, right? So like, I make sure that they got a picture and like all that good stuff. But I, you know, was very much in work and event mode, so I didn't get a chance to take a picture with them. And so we're like towards the tail end of the event, and it was like exhausting event, as they all are, because like there were 800 people, I think, who showed up, and we had like 30 volunteers, and it's like awesome, and we're all running around doing our thing, and it's like probably 100 degrees outside, and like the event was like in this like covered but like outdoor space, so it's like super hot and stuff. So like we're getting towards the end, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get to go and like get dinner with my parents and all that stuff. So we're towards the end, and I'm kind of backstage with Sarah Lena and a couple other staffers, and Chasten and Mayor Adler's wife, who Mayor Adler's the mayor of Austin, were also backstage with us, because they were going to go straight from our event to the Austin Pride Parade. And so Mayor Adler's on stage, like answering questions with Pete. And so it's me, Sarah Lena, Chasten, and Mayor Adler's wife, Diane, kind of in our backstage area, which was also like, you know, very grassroots made. But Sarah Lena turns to me and she says, did you get a picture? I met your parents. Did you get a chance to get a picture with them, Pete? And I was like, no, it's okay. They got their picture. Like, we're good. But no, I didn't get a chance because, you know, there's too much going on. She's like, oh, okay. And I didn't think anything else of it. Um, Several moments later, I have Chasten turn to me because they're literally going from our event to the Pride Parade. So Chasten turns to me and he goes, is there any way that I could use the restroom before the next event? And so like as a staffer, I'm like, oh man, we gotta figure this out. And so my entire focus like goes from, you know, the event's about to end. I know like staff have that covered. So I'm like, how do we get this man to a restroom? So we find out that in the alley back way, there's like a restaurant, there's like a connected restaurant that's closed for the day where we can get them into the restroom. So I'm like standing out in the alley, waiting for the event to finish so I can escort Chasten to the bathroom. It becomes Chasten, Pete, Mayor Adler, and Diane, Mayor Adler's wife, suddenly all have to go to the restroom. And so like, I'm like, I've seen Pete a lot, obviously, because I've done a lot of events for him at this point, but like we do not interact that much directly. I'm more of like, you do your thing, sir. I'm gonna be over here doing my thing and we'll make sure this event goes great. Like I don't need to talk to you because I'm so nervous. But so the four of them like suddenly have to go to the restroom. So I'm escorting them all to this back alley restroom. They all go and, you know, do their thing. Like it's funny because as he's walking to the restroom and I'm like pointing to it, like Pete like sees me and he like double backs and he's like, oh hey, I think I met your parents. And I was like, yes sir, you did. And then he goes to the restroom and then they all come back and I'm escorting them back to the car. And as I'm escorting them back to the car, which is also in this back alley, I see Sarah Lena and Anthony, who was my boss, pulling my parents out from the event space. So they had gone and like my parents were like upstairs in this like, you know, like hard to reach area. And they took the time to like find my parents and be like, no, we're getting Raven her picture with Pete and Chasten today. So they like pull them in and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. My mom, as they're pulling them out into the alleyway, my mom sees me, sees Pete and Chasten behind me, and she immediately realizes what's happening, that she's about to have to take a picture and she's hot and sweaty. So my mom like darts back into the event space to the bathroom because she's like, I have to go prep myself. So then like there's like photos of me, Pete, Chasten, and my dad like looking at my mom like, what are you doing? But then they go back and get her and we ended up getting a really great picture. But I say that it's a great, like a kind of long story, but I say that to say like, I never in a million years would have thought I want to make sure I get a picture with my parents, you know, or like that's a priority for me at this event. I never in a million years would have thought telling Sarah Lena the fact that I didn't get a picture with them like would have mattered in any type of way. But the fact that like she then organized the staff to go find my parents and make sure that we got that moment together again is like such a reflection of that team. And I always say a leader is shown through their team because they're going to act in ways that like the leader can't control when he's not around. And the fact that they were willing to do that, I think built a higher level of trust for me that was already so high, but like, oh, these people really care about me. And like, this is really a family and like, we're going to rally around each other and make sure we're taken care of. So those are my two stories.
That's great to hear. And I think like what you said, a leader, you know, how a business or a campaign or anything is a reflection of leadership. And so that's awesome to, you know, obviously individuals saw and felt trust with Pete as a candidate, but to hear that that was essential and a big part of how the campaign went about itself as a staff. That's great to hear as well, because we don't always get to hear the stories of the campaign work, and so that's cool. Well, and you mentioned, you know, that you worked in finance earlier, and kind of talked a little bit of maybe that lack of trust in that environment. And so, like thinking back to it, what like we could start with business or just even as communities. You mentioned the power of relational organizing and listening and whatnot, but what do you think are some tangible ways institutions like a business can, or our government can take to rebuild trust?
Absolutely. I think so much of it starts at the organization and the organization leadership trusting their staff as well. I think there's also a lack of trust from the top down just as much as the bottom up. And I found for myself as a leader, and certainly as a staffer or someone in an organization who might be on the lower level rungs of an organization, is the closer you are to the ground, the better understanding you have of what's actually happening. And the leaders up at the top, like their job is really to see from everyone's perspective and kind of take in all that information and be able to make those decisions at a high level. But it's also about having those conversations on those lower levels and really kind of flipping that pyramid and understanding like the people on the ground, the people in those grassroots spaces have the best understanding of what their needs are and what's actually happening, and therefore what needs fixing, and probably what are the best ways to fix it, that we don't really see happening in organizations anymore. And it used to be a best practice. When you look at kind of like the real like age of whether it's, I think about Ford and GM, like the dawn of, car manufacturing and things like that in our country, like it really was an appreciation of workers on every level of that organization, understanding that they all play a part in the success of that organization. And therefore we should trust them with a certain level of responsibility and understanding of what their role is. And now it's a lot more of, just kind of pointing and directing people without any real appreciation or understanding of where they stand.
I was just typing in the chat how I really like that leader, sees and appreciates the perspective of everyone within the organization. And so if you are maybe at the top of the chart, if you will, within the respected institutions you are part of, I really challenge us to think of how are we cultivating and appreciating everyone within our institutions. I think we wanted to, I said it'd be 30 to 45 minutes, and we're getting close to that 45-minute time here. And Jamel's been part of our past few book clubs, and Pete or to Building Bridges, and has heard a lot about Pete Buttigieg campaign, and he had a great question that I'm going to allow him to answer. You good? So Dana, if we could unmute Jamel.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yep.
It's nice to meet you, and thanks for everything that you do. So this is a question about trust, and also about a previous book that we read.
Real quick.
Oh, can she hear me from afar? Is that her dog? We have the same issue.
Dog.
Is that your dog? We have the same issue. Your dog sort of likes to bark at the wrong time, and not much you can do about it. But one of the earlier books that we read, and I can't remember whether it was Politics is for Power or On Trumping America, talked about with some dismay with respect to the fact that campaigns and organization and money, all the money goes to consultants, and it's a whole industry. So now you're somebody who's, I think, gone from the campaign world, and you're now in a strategy firm. How does that what kind of challenge is associated with that now that you're trying to actually create a business out of it as part of what you're doing? How does that affect how you build your relationships with the people that you're trying to work with? Does it undermine trust, or are there ways through that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it really embodies the reason why we created like our business TripTych to begin with, is because we saw so much in the space, um, acting very much in the way that you spoke of, kind of being very self-interested, looking to like consulting, political consulting in and of itself is, a big money business to be completely honest. And a lot of it is kind of charging campaigns for things that they don't necessarily need to be charged for, or giving very high dollar top line rates versus being willing to break it down and say this is everything we're charging you for and why. And so when we say it's TripTych, we're reimagining political culture. That is so much of what we want to come in and kind of rewrite, is say we want to be very upfront and honest about what we can provide, what you're going to get within our rate, and build a new business model that is absolutely based on trust and wanting to work with candidates, and wanting to work with nonprofit organizations or companies or whatever it may be, but do it in a way that is reflective of our values first. And so one of the first things, the really first thing that I did for our company is wrote our values out, and they're on our company website. Belonging is one of them. Accountability is another. We have candor. We have now I'm gonna be like, can I name them off? We have candor, accountability, belonging. I'm gonna cheat and pull them up because Wes dropped the links. You all can check them out too. Magic, excellence, and radical optimism. And so we really want to be thoughtful about what values we want to represent as a company, and what we're bringing to the table, and being very clear and open and honest with any organization or campaign that comes to us and says that they want to work with us, that these are the values that we're bringing to the table when you hire us as well. And these are the expectations that we're going to have for you as our client, just as much as we're going to have them for ourselves. And I know personally, and within my work, I find myself kind of saying the best way for me to make a difference is in my day-to-day, like just being, how I interact with the people around me, how I do the work, and apply the work that I'm doing day to day. Just applying my values across the board to my day-to-day interactions and what I produce and put out into the world, in and of itself has the power to bring about transformative change. And we don't think about that a lot, but like being kind in a moment where someone isn't being the best to me is probably one of the hardest things to do. But if I'm able to do that and hold that space for someone, and I'm speaking from experience, right? Of like, you're actually being really messed up right now. But what I'm gonna do is, like, I'm not gonna take that in, number one, but I'm gonna hold space for it and say, and come out of it, and respond in a way that is still thoughtful and gets my point across. I can be strong, but I can also be open, and thoughtful in how I respond. And so carrying myself in that way. And we obviously see that with Pete out in the world as well, and how he's responding to things right now. But yeah, carrying myself and holding true to my values in my day-to-day interactions, I found is my best way to make that impact, and how we want to make an impact with our firm. So, but that's a really good question. I will also say, like, as we start like work to build out this business, we found it is not easy. Like, that's the other thing. It is not easy to stay grounded in those values every day. It is not comfortable. to consistently say that we're going to do things different and we're going to compete with other firms by, with these values and with, our business model that says we're going to be open and transparent in everything that we do. Like it is uncomfortable, really hard work, but it's also the work that we think is necessary to make it the practice that is true across the board. So, yeah. Thank you. That was I really appreciate that question because it's been a tough one that we're working through. So thank you.
I actually, I'll full disclose, Jamel has asked great questions every single week. And so I DM'd him privately and was like, there's no questions for tonight. Come on. Like, I love your questions. So thank you, Jamel, and thank you for your honesty and just sharing your experience as you're going through this journey with the new opportunity. And then if you have time, Pristine had one more question that will be our last one for our Q&A tonight.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll get you.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Awesome.
So, as a fellow person of color, a woman of color, really, I just wanted to, point out that since America's birth, institutions have kind of ostracized and sidelined Black, Indigenous people of color, for as long as we can remember. So I wanted to ask a little bit, if you could just share a little bit about how trust has kind of shaped your experience with those institutions, especially as a Black woman in politics.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it's something I've been really working through, particularly my whole life, obviously, but in a different way in the last couple of weeks, particularly as we get close to Election Day and whatever result that brings. But I'm, kind of trying to find my radical optimism in this time as I grapple with, taking in the election result, no matter what it is, and knowing that, I've done my part and I voted the first day of early vote here in Texas and that whole thing, but really grappling with, where I stand with the country and where I'll be personally, regardless of the outcome of the election, knowing that the work will continue and it must continue no matter who wins, and hopefully Joe Biden wins. But no matter what, like we have very real questions and questions around, our systemic structures and all those things that we have to grapple with. And what I've been coming back to is actually my experience of my first years of school, which started in kindergarten or technically preschool, but my first memories of school were on an Air Force base in Hanscom, which was right outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And the reason why I remember those so clearly is because obviously Boston feels very strongly about what should be taught in history books. I know a lot about Paul Revere and the Boston Tea Party, more than most people would probably, but I found myself very young falling in love with this country and its history before I had any understanding, right, of what racism is or what it meant to be or what the world saw me as a Black woman and a woman of color. And I was just learning who I was as an American. And so when I started to have to grapple with those two things kind of parallel and intersecting a lot of times, it brought up a lot of questions for me. I think where I've come to in this moment is kind of what I was going back to as far as like my response to Jamal's question was, I think within the system, where it all starts is us understanding where we fit into the system and who we can be. Or I'm going to kind of fumble with this because I think it's something I'm still figuring out, to be honest. But, I think for me, where I know I can make the most change is where I am right here, right now, right? And how I interact with the people in my life day to day, I have a lot of power there. And I think it's important for us to understand where we hold power in the world, because I think a lot of times, particularly as women of color, we can feel very disempowered when we look at the world and we see what's reflecting back at us. And so I think finding those places of power are so important for us to be able to carry on and do this really hard work. I think also one of the beautiful things about relational organizing is it does allow you to come into a space of community. And I think so much of what's important about being willing to not just learn to have these tough conversations, right, but also, exist in a world that doesn't always want to accept you and say that you are powerful and you are worthy, is finding a community that's willing to take you in and help do the work with you and stand with you, and give you that sense of belonging, is also so very important. And I think especially important in times like this, when we're living not just in a space that is being socially disrupted, by the losses of people like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and confronting that injustice, but we're also having to confront it in a world that is pandemic driven and we can't connect to people the way that we typically would. We can't hug all the people and we can't see all the people, and meet up in person in the ways that we would have been able to, just a couple months ago. And so finding spaces like this, where we can feel that sense of community and support, are so important. But I also think finding the places in your life where you do hold power and not allowing the spaces in the system that try to disempower you to make you feel a sense of fear, or that you aren't enough or you don't belong, because that's obviously not true. And I think that's where those spaces in the system try to exist a lot of the time, is saying that we aren't worthy, we don't belong. And I think we've all felt that in one way or the other. And part of why Pete's campaign was so special too, is because it brought so many people together in that way of like, I didn't know other people were thinking this way, and I didn't know that I could create a community like this, and I didn't know there were so many Democrats or whatever, in my community as I thought they were. And so, yeah, I think again, I kind of fumbled with the answer because it's something I'm honestly still grappling with, but where I've really come to is your community, and having that home base for yourself is so important, but also understanding your power to affect the system in your day-to-day life, simply by how you carry yourself and how you interact, and still acting with a sense of integrity and belonging, and still being willing to trust, which is a very vulnerable act in and of itself, can be pretty radical and revolutionary, in this time. So I hope I answered it okay, or gave you something to hang on to.
Well, and thank you so much, Raven, for sharing your time and sharing your perspective and your truth. I just appreciate it, and appreciate what you helped create, within the Pete campaign, but then also as you are using that to continue to change how campaigns and causes operate, to extend that experience elsewhere. And I think, like what you said, it's a challenge to every single one of us here tonight, is, this work will not be done come November 11th or November 4th, or whatever day it is that we get the results. It's continual, and it's each and every day. And we have the opportunity to hold that power and utilize it. And I think as you said, you were jumbling through it, but I think you really nailed it. Like, we can influence where we are right here, right now. And those decisions are powerful in many ways. So thank you so much. I don't know if you have any last quick thoughts you wanted to give to the group before we discuss this week's reading, but on behalf of everyone, thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, just very quick, thank you, Wes, and all of you so much for welcoming me into this space, and being willing to hear me talk for 45 minutes. It was truly an honor, and I thank you guys so much. And what you're building here is literally what we need right now. And so just continue to do it, and anything I can continue to do to support, and we'll hopefully get to pop into a couple more of these down the road as you guys build out and get even bigger. But I'm so proud, number one, to have played any role in a campaign that is able to carry on and continue to build and stretch out the community the way that you guys have post the campaign. And hopefully there will be another, another election run at some point where we can all come back for that. I don't want to speak too far into the future, but definitely like just very grateful that you guys were going to take out the time, and you were so fun and lovely, and I had a great time. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Raven. You have a great night.
Thank you guys. See you later.
Bye-bye. Well, I think just another awesome discussion, and week one with Mayor Christine, who I believe is on the our Zoom call with us tonight, and then hearing from Raven tonight. I just think it's just been a great insight into just be able to hear from both of their perspectives. And we are going to go till 9 o'clock my time, because Central Time is the only time in my world, right, Jana? But 10 o'clock East Coast time, and hopefully you can figure out the rest if you're in Mountain or Pacific. But we did want to spend some time on this week's reading, which was chapter 2 and 3. Chapter 2 was all based on the loss of trust, and chapter 3 was about trust for a deciding decade. And so if you have the book, chapter 2 starts on page 57. So if you wanted to flip there. Now, we didn't have any questions submitted over the actual readings. And I have to be full disclosure, I also did not get the reading done this week. So Wes is behind. But I did have a few questions based from our conversation, or just based on the reading that I was able to do. And so as I kind of get us started, if you have a question, or if you found a particular part of the book that really spoke to you in chapter 2 or 3, be sure to pop those comments in the chat, so that way we can dialogue about it. But the thing I wanted to just talk about, Pete starts chapter 2 off with just how we get rid of trust in institutions is by sowing doubt, and saw that in many different examples. And with doubt becoming a thing that just can so easily bring distrust to our society, how do we as grassroots organizers, how do we counter the doubt, and how do we bring out a message to counter that? And I'm opening that to the whole group. So how can we as grassroots organizers counteract to the doubt that's being sowed and spread by various entities? So you can use that raise hand feature, or comment in the chat, and we'll get you unmuted. Looks like Jamel.
I would just say, I mean, am I on? Can you hear me? Okay. I think it's one of those things where they say sunshine is the best antiseptic. The more that you can expose the reason that somebody is sowing doubt, you're not necessarily trying to counter their truth per se, but you're just trying to shed light on why they might be doing what they're doing. The tobacco industry, was a really good way to begin. It was a really, it was a neat thing to talk about, how they did what they were doing. But you can see how when they were exposed in terms of the intent, with respect to trying to muddle the truth, it led to a downfall of sorts, and it has led to change. So I just think that you can't necessarily always counter obfuscation of truth, but you can dig in and expose people for what they are.
Thank you, Jamel. And I believe Vanessa also had a comment to raise in regards to my question.
So, you guys know, I'm like am I here? Because my cam flipped a couple of times. Okay. So you guys know I'm like the internet nerd. I own a chat room. I wake up, I go on and I seek out Republicans. It's like my thing. I love it. And I've been really trying to nail down a few of them lately. They just believe anything that they see, believe anything that they hear. And if you're in the Building Bridges DM, you might have saw this yesterday. I found a game called Factitious. And it's basically a game that has a whole bunch of true stories and a whole bunch of stories that are not true, a bunch of disinformation. And I played it with them yesterday. And 2 people are voting for Biden now, but Trump, which is really, really great. But I feel like we have to find things like that to kind of like show people like what they're believing is just so outrageous, because in this day of QAnon and all of this, I mean, if you give them a link or give them a story, they're going to come right back at you with a link or with a story. And I don't know, this game, like after you got it right or wrong, like it had source after source after source. I'll put it in the chat here in a few minutes, but I used it again today. I'm going to use it again tomorrow. I'm going to use it again after that, because it's just, so I think finding things like that and finding ways to let people kind of figure out and realize on their own that I don't know. I mean, there's just got to be some way for us to, and like, I feel like that was just like a stepping stone in like the right direction, like the right path,
Yeah, well, and yes, please put that link in the chat so everyone can see what you are talking about. But and as I was just kind of thinking through my own question, we've read a lot of other books, and Raven talked a lot about values. And I think a big way to counter doubt is by just speaking values and really not allowing the conversation to go into those different directions. And Pete talks a lot about the role media has played in trust. And that video Crossfire, Christy is on our call, and if you can find that link about Jonathan Stewart and him responding to Crossfire and how ridiculous it is. And then as Pete was writing about that, he mentions how the show Crossfire, while it can be good in some ways to have a debate and show conversation of 2 opposing views, but how they turned it into almost like a sport and really about entertainment. And that's what we talked about in our last book by Eitan Hirsch, Politics is for Power. And so I just really found that conversation to be interesting and whatnot. So that was one question. Christy, thank you so much. Christy just popped that link. It's a YouTube link, and I'll be sure to share that out with everyone, along with Vanessa's little link on disinformation. But so yeah, so I did find that. And people are putting things in the chat, so trying to read these things as they're going. But Yes, and Carlton Tucker was one of the co-hosts of Crossfire, so kind of interesting now seeing where he is and what he does. So, does anyone? So, chapter 2, the loss of trust. Maybe I forgot about my reflection question that I always like to ask people, and we'll tie it directly to trust, loss of trust. Does anyone want to take an act of vulnerability and get a little personal here and just share a moment or an action that made them lose trust in our government or in our democracy? All right, it looks like Liz's hand is raised.
Oh, Tracy raised her hand too. Sorry.
Okay. All right, go with Tracy, and then we can go with
You
Liz.
want to go?
This doesn't really relate to me specifically, but it's more like my brother. He was an American Field Service student in France in the 1970s. And that was during the whole Vietnam thing. And when people discovered his accent, they asked him where he was from. And he said Canada, in the Quebec area. And when Pete was talking about people from the US being advised to say they were Canadian and traveling overseas, that just spoke to me as how people don't trust us as being ourselves. We have to pretend we're somebody else to be trusted overseas.
Yeah, and we're definitely seeing that international trust play out currently, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing. All right, Liz.
Yeah, so I'm 55. So I was a kid when like Vietnam is on the TV news every night and student protests and racial unrest in the cities and leaders being assassinated and Watergate, all this happened when I was a kid in school. So like, okay, Wes, you're a teacher, you're teaching American history, stoking up the patriotism, right? And so we get like those school lessons in history, but at the same time it's like, oh my God, everything's falling apart. And I mean, Watergate was particularly upsetting because, the president was trying to cheat the system. He was the criminal. He was the crook. And, the lies, the Pentagon Papers and lies about the Vietnam War and everything else. It just, I think from a very young age, I have been sort of cynical and distrustful of government. And a lot of political talk really just falls into that because it's just such crap, And I think that's why I love Pete so much, because he doesn't talk that way. He talks common sense and values and, kind of calling to our better angels, and that it's really about us. And, I was feeling very distressed and anxious with the ongoing Trump administration. And when I first saw Pete early last year, it was like a new hope was born in me, and so I do have not necessarily trust in government. I see the raw exercise of power, but I have a lot of hope for we the people.
Well, and and I think that's why you choose to spend a lot of your evenings writing postcards, phone banking, text banking, because you have that hope. And as Raven talked about, making sure we all have communities that invest in us and allow us to accumulate power and to utilize the power that we have. So thank you, Liz. It looks like Laura has her hand raised.
Hey guys, so when I was reading the book at that point, I was really thinking about where not only you lose trust in government, but also government is sliding so far behind in terms of their understanding of all the other things we need to trust in. Mm-hmm. So for instance, we think now where there is this moment where, say, technology has taken over our lives, right? And we have seen these hearings where congressional leaders and Senate leaders don't even understand the technology. And so they're the ones who are supposed to be protecting us from something. But when they, they don't even, you've got a senator sitting there with his jitterbug flip phone going, well, I don't even know how Facebook works. I'm like, well, what the hell is this guy even doing here? And so it's not even the major things. I mean, like I remember Watergate. I remember Watergate very clearly. I'm 53 years old. I remember what happened. I remember that was a very big moment. But that seemed so huge. And then you see these things where the government is supposed to be taking care of us. And when there are those moments where I'm just watching something on C-SPAN because I have no life and I see that this is happening and I go, they don't get it. Why don't we have things set up so they get it? And that is where that kind of layer of trust and what actually happens in our day-to-day that literally makes me go, okay, there's something that needs to be just that from a systematic standpoint, we need to start to tear down some of this and get it working better. And that's what I'm really hoping happens moving forward, that with new blood coming in, with all the down ballot races and all the things that are happening, is that we are able to actually have some people who can do the work. And then also really reimagining what are the priorities, right? Because what we've done all along, if you look at all the things that aren't working, is because when they create these bills and they create these actions, they add stuff to it that doesn't make sense. And you're just kind of like adding Bondo. You ever wreck your car and you put Bondo on it? Well, it might look okay, but then when you actually turn it in to get a deal, someone's gonna go, this car's a piece of crap. And it's like, well, yeah, because there's 17 layers of Bondo on it. We've put like 1,000 layers of Bondo on our system, and it looks like it now. So that's what I was thinking when I was reading the book. I'm like, I just have, there's more than trust that's a problem with one thing. It's all interconnected. And when it doesn't keep up with each other, we're just never going to trust the system until somebody actually breaks it down and builds it back up.
Well, Pete talks about how it's not only do Americans trust their government less, we trust one another less too. And Raven talked so much about community, and I think back to Politics is for Power, where we learned about deep canvassing, where it wasn't just getting to know your community members and who they're voting for, but really getting to know what is it that they need to make their lives better. Laura, you brought that up, government making lives better, and just thinking of concrete, true actions that all of us can take to make community. Because when we build community and people feel belonged and feel as if they have power and can make a difference, going back to what Liz said, we the people is strong, and that cannot be knocked down. And so so I don't know, I don't know. I think I told Christy this and Vanessa this, like, you get this feeling like, oh, 2 more weeks and can breathe, but we can't. We cannot stop, because people don't feel belonged. People do not have power. People are not being helped by our government, and that's not going to change just because of a new president or 4 new Democratic senators or a larger majority in the House. It's not going to change. And so Laura, thank you, and Liz, thank you, because those are really good. We got about 8 minutes until the hour, and thank you, Libby, for your thing of how you felt lost and lost trust in government specifically. It's hard, and and sometimes I don't think we even maybe take time to process really how we have lost trust with so many things that we grew up to believe are there for us, but we really find out they're not. So yeah, chapter 3 talks about trust for a deciding decade. I did not get to that part, so I don't even have anything to share with you all. Yes, tisk tisk. Teachers are the worst students. But there was a part in there, he does talk about the foreign leadership, which, Tracy, thank you for raising. The part I found was on page 131. And I thought this was an important message. And it's a conversation I've been having with folks, particularly my friends and family who are more right-leaning with the whole Supreme Court justice thing and blah-de-da-de-da. But on page 131, the Constitution's most elegant quality, its capacity to be amended. And then later on, he writes, this feature of the Constitution was itself an expression of trust in future generations. And I think that is an important message. As Raven mentions how she was taught American history and it was all focused on Paul Revere and whatnot, but like really nailing down that whole part of our Constitution is not an originalist because the founders knew they weren't perfect. That's why we have amendments. And yeah, so I just found that part really interesting. Let's open up the floor. Let's hear from some other folks we haven't heard tonight. What have you liked about what you heard from Raven or what you read in chapters 2 or 3? Teresa, could you drop that link, please? Teresa put in the chat, it's I assume a documentary, What the Constitution Means to Me, and it's available on Amazon Prime. All right, y'all, there are like 34 of you, and we've only heard from like 8 of us tonight, so where are the other 26? Let the people speak. That's okay, Sarah, I didn't either. That's why I have nothing to add.
Well, I have something. I actually read it. But, and I'm not going to be able to find it, but I thought it was interesting that Pete, in the 3rd chapter, I guess it is, the 3rd chapter, where he was talking about how it's been, like a really long time relatively since we've had any amendments done, and which just shows the need for things to get done. I mean, things are not getting done and things need to change. And I think it speaks some to what Laura's talking about too. I mean, this whole election's not just about getting Trump out of there. I mean, that's huge, but what Pete always talked about, like, the new, a new era of leadership. I mean, we need to get these stale old geezers out of there that don't know. I mean, honestly, Wes, like in my district in Nebraska, I mean, we're like very red, very Republican, and the Democrat is Kate Bowles, and she is an uphill battle because we're just so Republican. But in that case, I mean, we have a guy that's been in there for 16 years, does the same old thing. And even though she's a very moderate Democrat, she's someone, she's about 40. She understands, the issues that, we've had so much change just this year with, equality, and we're on the brink. I mean, there's a reckoning and things are changing, but you need people in there that understand that is real and it needs to be, attention needs to be paid to all this stuff. So, I mean, I'm just praying for a huge blue wave so we can get some of these people in there. Because we have to, like, and you said there has to be like some kind of movement. And I loved how, I'm just babbling now, but how Raven was talking about, even our group building bridges, and that we have to keep going and building out what we do and reaching out and bringing people in, because the fact that voter turnout is so low, I mean, people are not engaged. People don't think that their vote matters. They don't feel like they have a voice, but we have to change that. And a lot of this new leadership can do that. You know, you get these people in who are brand new, who just decided to run on a whim. I mean, we just have to change the whole culture of our politics, I think. And because we were exposed to, you know, Pete was kind of our trigger or our catalyst that kind of got us moving because we're motivated by, you know, his vision. I mean, we kind of all have that same vision. And I'm not sure even what my point was now. But just, I think just listening to him or reading the chapter and seeing, you know, the things that people might think are radical, like why is, you know, the court, you know, changing get rid of the electoral college, and why are some of these things thought of as being so radical? It's just, you know, things change, you know, things change. We got to keep up with it. And I think we're way beyond, and we're way late. You know, we need to get this going. So I don't know.
Well, and if you just, you know, I'm a history teacher, and our country has always been radical. And, you know, and I just think how we talk about things, and, you know, that's why I really love what Dr. Lakoff shared about framing the debate and, you know, making sure conservatives, I just saw the article yesterday or the other day of, you know, this issue of freedom is not a right or left issue. It's an American issue, and we as progressives need to reclaim freedom.
Yep.
I did see Mayor Christine, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I mean, I think transparency and communication are really important because it's great to have whatever wave, but government works at a different pace than Twitter does. And I just bring that up because sometimes people will get in and their intentions can be as good as anything and they want what you want, but it's a very more complicated process because you have a lot of people, you have to get buy-in, there are processes. And so that's where the communication and the transparency come in. And then those communications have to be trusted by the community. And so that's why that trust portion is so important. Because, you know, you get somebody will get into office and everybody's like, well, he's been there 5 weeks. What's going on? Why didn't he this? And then all of a sudden that trust gets gone again. And then there becomes a mistrust between the public servant and the community. And that starts then hampering the communication. And then all of a sudden it becomes like this vicious cycle. And so for any partnership, and I think public service and community, that is a partnership. There has to be trust on both sides. There has to be transparency and communication on both sides. And the point of getting to know each other on an individual level is so that you know that even though they might not have made the decision you thought they should have made exactly at that moment, you trust who they are. Yeah. And that's where that personal thing is so important. So I don't know, just want to add.
No, I think that, and I think that as Christine, as you were talking, Senator Megan Hunt, she actually was a guest for when we talked about Dr. Lakoff's "Don't Think of an Elephant," and you know, she would call herself a fairly progressive individual in Nebraska, which we're not very progressive at all. And she talked about how, yeah, you know, like you can have activists who want that revolutionary change, but then you also have to have individuals in government who, yeah, they want that because that's their values and their philosophies, but also being willing to continue to go through that grind. And people keep voting for her because they trust her, regardless of where they are at on the progressive spectrum. It's all comes down to trust because she is transparent. She sticks to her values in every decision, and that's how she communicates. And so, yeah, I think that's great. And Mayor Christine, you are definitely someone who has exemplified those tributes. Otherwise, you wouldn't be where you are today and where you will be going in the months to come as a state representative as well. So thank you for that perspective. Well, it is a couple minutes after there, and I think, I see modeling being mentioned in the chat. I see civics education. This book is challenging me as an educator for how I teach government and how can I bring trust. Jordan, I think I saw you in the chat here tonight, but as teachers and talking about this issue and just how can we, my challenge for you in this next week is how can you start listening, especially if you run into someone who is undecided with 2 weeks. It may sound crazy that someone can be right now, but they are out there. Maybe it's someone you find who maybe isn't even going to vote. And so how can we build trust in these next 2 weeks with those individuals? How can we listen to them? And then how can we effectively share our story as well from a values perspective, and really start that work about having conversations and building trust with individuals that we interact with on a daily basis? And then, as Raven said, how can we take advantage of where we are right now and truly take power in those situations and use it to make it a better community, a better society. So lots of challenges, lots of work out there. It's hard, but I think that's why we all showed up today. That's why we all wanted to read this book and gain its insights, because I think we want better for ourselves and for others. And so you can want it, but are you going to put the work in to make it happen? So what are you going to do in this next week? So thank you all so much. My goal is to get those recordings out to you all from last week and this week. And then I hope to see you the following week. We have, and I always forget Swati's name, so I'm going to look it up right now. But for our final week of book club, we will be reading chapter 4. And then I also really hope that you take a look at appendix 1, because that's a lot of where Pete gets a lot of information from. But Swati, and I know I'm not going to pronounce it correctly. So Swati is a good friend of Pete. They met in college, and she will be joining us for week 3, our final week. And yes, thank you, Jody. Mila Valarapu. We'll see, but she will be joining us. And then I will also let you know that we will be having a pre-recorded video from a very special guest. And my only hint is to you that I have been able to get every single author to join us as part of our book club discussion. And that streak will be continuing even into this book. So there you go. So we'll have that and our conversation with Swati, and then our conversation just ending the whole dialogue about this book. So Vanessa, can you put the links in the chat? I'm not going to share my PowerPoint because honestly, y'all, my allergies are killing me and I'm ready to go down some NyQuil and go to bed. But there's so many ways you can get involved with building bridges if you want to take some true action to create a government where Democrats across the country, all the way from Joe Biden to Ricky, who's in Florida, with Christine, to other candidates. We're helping a congresswoman in New Mexico on Friday night. We phone bank for Joe and Kamala on Monday. So, so many ways that you can really make a difference no matter where you are to help bring more trust to our government by electing individuals that believe in the common the common need to support all people and to believe in science and to believe in just facts that should not be debated because it's just nonsense and it doesn't help. So get involved. Please check that website out, and we hope to see you throughout the week, and hope to see you next Monday as we end our conversation on trust. So Janet, you go ahead and feel free to unmute folks so everyone can say goodbye to one another. I think there's an easy way, but otherwise you can always say goodbye non-verbally. So have a good one. Thank you all so much.